Well, we're coming rapidly to the finish line, but I hasten to say we are ending on a very powerful note. As we conclude, I am personally very excited to have one of the leading voices in educational improvement and reform as our final keynote. It goes without saying that access to a quality education is fundamental to the health of children and families and to the communities where all of us work. Rhee is the founder and CEO of StudentsFirst, a national nonprofit focused on issues impacting public education. But she may be more familiar to many of you as the outspoken chancellor of the Washington, D.C. public school system. As chancellor, she focused on transforming what had long been criticized as one of the worst performing school districts in the country. During her 3-year tenure, many grades enjoyed double-digit growth in reading and math scores. Graduation rates increased, enrollment increased, and some schools had a waiting list for the first time ever. Today, Ms. Rhee spends her time leading StudentsFirst, a grassroots movement to mobilize parents, teachers, students, administrators, and citizens around improving education. She draws on her background as a former Teach for America participant and is the founder of the New Teachers Network, which implemented reforms for attracting and hiring quality teachers for public schools. It is my great personal pleasure to introduce Rhee.
Thank you. So I have to tell you in full disclosure that I usually don't like to do luncheon speeches because after people eat and then it's the last thing before you all go home, you're sort of like, okay, hurry up. So it's a lot of pressure, but when my honey tells me to do something, I always say yes right away. But what intrigued me about this opportunity was that he said it was for LISC. Now, one thing that you should know about my fiance, Kevin, is that he is the most efficient person around. He does not waste any time. So he doesn't sit on 50 boards because it's not an efficient use of his time. But in the 6 years that I've known him, this is one of the boards that he is most committed to. He goes to all the meetings, he talks about it all the time. And so I've never been particularly familiar with LISC, and so I thought this is my opportunity to get to know why he's so committed to the organization. And I think that the test of a great organization is how quickly can you envelop people, other people, outsiders, in understanding what your organization is about. So yesterday night was my first sort of access to or exposure to LISC, and I have to say you did an unbelievable job of having a newcomer come in and understand what you're doing and why it's so important. And after the end of the evening, I sort of was so inspired that I kind of felt like I owed Paul Brogan and Lisa Cashin our firstborn child because they've done so much for the organization. So I'm a believer now. I was asked to talk a little bit about public education. I know that LISC is doing more and more work in education. So what I want to talk about today is sort of the state of public education today, but also why I feel so incredibly hopeful moving forward. So first, before I kind of get started on all of that, I want to give you a little bit of background about my comments because a lot of it will be driven based on my experience here as the chancellor in Washington, D.C. I became the chancellor in 2007, and Adrian Fenty, who was then the mayor of D.C., sort of swept into office in November of 2006, was the youngest mayor ever elected in the city, the only mayor ever to win every single precinct in the district. He sort of came in, made education his #1 priority. On the first day in office, introduced legislation to take over mayoral control of the schools, won that in April. June 12th, 2007 was his first day officially having control of the schools, and he named me as his pick, his nomination for the schools chancellor. And the city went sort of numb, I think, because I was the exact opposite of what people both wanted and expected in the city's first schools chancellor. I was a 37-year-old girl, a Korean girl from Toledo, Ohio, who had never run a school, much less a school district. Toledo in the house, all right? And people were thinking, Adrian Fenty has lost his mind. Why does he think that this is the woman to lead this district? So that's sort of the auspicious beginnings of my career here. And it was interesting because over the first few weeks, I would often go out and talk to whoever would listen to me. So Rotary clubs, civic associations, community groups, and I would give this, rousing speech about what public education meant and what my vision was for how we were going to improve the quality of public education in the city. And what was interesting about it was that inevitably, after each of these talks, people would come up to me and say, we like you, Michelle. You seem really smart and motivated and enthusiastic, but you are not going to succeed. And I'd always say, gee, thanks for the vote of confidence. Why do you think so? And they'd say, because schools are a reflection of the communities that they're in. And as long as we have the economic disparity in this country that we do, we will always have the educational inequality, because you are always going to have some communities where there's a tremendous amount of wealth and resources and investment and engagement, and in those communities you're going to have excellent schools. And then you're also going to have some communities where there is poverty, there is blight, there is less engagement, and in those communities you're going to have less good schools. That's democracy, that's capitalism, live with it. And I never used to agree that that is what had to be the case. And I could never in those early days sort of figure out how to articulate why I felt so passionately about the fact that that was not going to be the reality in DC. And it wasn't until sometime in my first year in office when I had the chance to meet Warren Buffett. So first of all, never in my life, people, would I ever think that I would have the opportunity to ever meet Warren Buffett. But there I was one day in Omaha, Nebraska, having a steak dinner with Warren. And he's actually an alum of the DC public schools. And he said to me, he looked at me and he said, Michelle, it is very easy to fix the problems in public education in America today. And I said, super. Can you tell me what that is so I can run back to DC and implement it? And he said, yes. All you need to do is make private schools illegal and assign every child to a random to a public school by random lottery. So think about this for a minute. Because if we did that in Washington, D.C., which meant that every ambassador's child, every CEO's child, every congressman's child, and the president's 2 children were assigned to a random DC public school by lottery, which means that a huge percentage of them would be going to Anacostia every day for their schooling, I guarantee you that you would never see a faster movement of resources from one side of the city to the other, as you would in that circumstance. And I can also guarantee you that very quickly we would have a system of excellent schools. So the question in my mind is not, is it possible to do this? The answer to that question is yes, it is possible. The more relevant question is, do we, as the adults in this system, have the wherewithal that it would take to make the incredibly difficult decisions necessary to make that a reality for every child in this country? And the answer, unfortunately, to that question so far has been no. So that was sort of my beginnings, right? And I very quickly sort of, immersed myself in what was going on in Washington, D.C. Why were we known as the most dysfunctional, most troubled school district in the country? And just to give you a little taste of this, I'll give you a few statistics from 2007. At the time, we had a situation where if you were a 9th grader entering high school in our system, the chances that you would be graduating from college within 5 years of graduating from high school was 9%. A 9% chance of graduating from college. We had an achievement gap between where our white students were performing and where our African American students were performing at the secondary level of 70 percentage points. A 70 percentage point gap. Of all of the 8th graders in the city's schools, only 8% of them were operating on grade level in mathematics, which meant that 92% of our young people did not have the skills and knowledge necessary to be productive members of society. And the most disheartening data was about our little ones. Basically, what that data showed was that our children were coming into our system as kindergartners, basically on par with other kids who looked like them in other cities across the country. So not with the suburban counterparts, we already knew that they were far behind them, but with other kids who looked like them in Philadelphia, Sacramento, Compton, across the nation. The problem was that the longer they stayed in our system, the further behind they fell. By the time they were in the 3rd grade, they were far below their urban counterparts, and this was probably the saddest statistic, which is that by the time they hit the 4th grade, the poor black 4th graders in New York City were operating 2 full grade levels ahead of the poor black 4th graders in Washington, D.C. So for everyone who wanted to blame the low academic achievement levels of our kids on poverty and on single-parent households and on violence in the community, the last time I checked, the poverty in Harlem did not look all that different from the poverty in Southeast Washington, D.C., but the children in Harlem were operating 2 grade levels ahead of ours. So how does this happen, right? And how do you go about fixing it? Now, that was the questions that were sort of going through my head, and as everyone was saying Fenty's crazy, I'm thinking maybe Fenty was crazy to hire me. So the first thing that people said to me is, you have to figure out where the money is going, Michelle, because we're spending more money per child than almost any other urban jurisdiction in the country, and the results were at the absolute bottom. So this notion that you need more money to fix the problem, this was a proof point of why that wasn't actually the case at all. So I sent my folks out and I said, find out where all this money is going. And it was, interesting. So they came back to me, and the first team that came back to me said, we are spending an inordinate amount of money, actually about $80 million a year, transporting a few thousand special education kids through the system. And I sort of did the math, and it came out to be about $18,000 per child per year. And I thought, okay, for $18,000 a year, you could buy the kid a Saturn the first year and a driver for the Saturn every year after that, literally, for $18,000. So I said, I don't know anything about running bus routes, but I know I can do it for cheaper than that. This is great. We're going to recoup some of this money. We're going to push it down to the classroom. He said, no. The city had done such a bad job of transporting special education kids to their placement prior to my arrival that we were under a consent decree, a court order. There was a court-appointed special master of transportation, and his job was to get all the kids to the places where they're supposed to be on time, and he could spend as much money as he wanted to, as long as he accomplished those goals, and all we could do is pay the bill. We had no ability to control the cost. And I said, that's the craziest thing I've ever heard. And they said, that's what you think is the craziest thing you've ever heard. Wait till you hear this one. They said, part of why we have to transport these kids all around is because we are obligated to pay the private school tuition for these special education children who we have not been able to service in our system. And my special assistant said, let me just give you one example of this. He said, I was looking through all the files. Why are we sending these kids out to these private placements? He said, I found one example of a woman who works in the central office. He said she made 2 different mistakes with the files that I looked at. With one kid, she didn't fill out a form she was supposed to fill out. And with another kid, she didn't have a meeting she was supposed to have. And in both of these cases, it resulted in these children getting sent to a private facility that cost this district $227,000 a year in tuition per kid. So I thought to myself, well, I need to meet this woman. So my assistant calls her and says, ma'am, we need you to come to a meeting at the chancellor's office tomorrow at 5 o'clock. And she said, well, I'm going to have to check with my supervisor on that. And my assistant said, ma'am, the chancellor is your supervisor. She's everybody's supervisor. She said, okay, well, fine then. I'm going to bring my lawyer with me. He said, bring whoever you need to bring. Just show up at 5 o'clock. So 5 o'clock the next day rolls around. I walk into the conference room. I said, I understand you had a question about whether you should come to the meeting. She said, no, I'm sorry. I just got a little freaked out, but I'm good now. And I said, okay, great. So I sit down, I opened the files, and I said, so this kid, you didn't fill out the form. This kid, you didn't have the meeting. With 2 mistakes, you cost this district nearly $500,000. Help me understand what happened. She looked at me and she said, well, what you need to understand is that I am a very busy person. I have a lot of things to do, a lot of things on my plate, a lot of kids to take care of. Things are going to fall through the cracks. That's just the way that it is. And I looked at her and I said, no, You need to understand that if you believe this job is too big for you, then you need to go find another job to do. But if you are going to take the paycheck home every other week, then you have to take personal responsibility for everything within your job purview and doing it extraordinarily well. She looked at me and she said, but that's not fair. I mean, literally. So what I noticed as I was going on through the weeks is that there was this prevailing sentiment that people did not feel any kind of accountability or responsibility for what we were doing for kids every day, as long as I was coming in from 9 to 5 and filling out the forms, et cetera. So, you know, I started doing what I think any CEO in a turnaround situation would do when I was coming across issues like this. I actually started to fire people. And that didn't last very long. Because a few weeks into this, my then general counsel sort of came running into my office and he said, Chancellor Rhee, you have got to stop firing employees. And I said, why? If people are not doing their jobs, then we need to move them out and we need to, you know, replace them with people who can do the jobs because we need to build a great team to move this district in the right direction. And he said, well, welcome to the DC public schools, where we never fire anyone. And I said, well, you know what? I've talked to a lot of people in the city. I actually know that it is possible to do that. I think you're exaggerating a little bit. You know, I don't want to break any rules. So just tell me what I need to do in order to do this correctly, and then we'll start the process for removing these people. And he said, well, there are only 2 ways that you can remove an employee in the DC public school system. I said, okay, give me the first way. He said, you have to have done something egregious. And I said, well, that's perfect, because everybody that I'm talking about is egregiously incompetent. And he said, no, that doesn't count. He said, egregious, I mean, you either have to have hit a kid, and we have to have the videotape to show it, because 5 teachers and the principal is not enough, you know, seeing it. He said, or you have to have stolen money from the district, and we have to have the bank receipt to show it. Short of that, really, nothing's going to count as egregious. I said, okay, that's not good news. Give me the second way. And he said, you have to show a recurring pattern of incompetence. And I said, well, okay, let's go that route then. I mean, these people did not magically become incompetent the moment that I walked in the door. Surely we should be able to show this pattern. And he said, well, that's what you would think, but what you don't know is for 10 years in the school district, we've never given a performance evaluation to the people in the central office. And in order to meet the legal letter of the law of the recurring pattern, you have to have shown that you documented it, and we haven't given anyone a performance evaluation, so you can't fire anybody that way either. And I said, okay, so what are we supposed to do with these people that are not adding value to our organization? And he said, well, you can do what we normally do. We send them down to the schools. And I said, are you kidding me? I'm trying to get these people away from children, not putting them closer to kids. So for the short term, I said, you know what? I'm going to send a few of these folks home. Because think about it for a minute. If somebody who I pay $40,000 a year comes in any given week, makes 2 mistakes, costs me $500,000, my best cost-cutting mechanism is to let the person stay at home for a little while. And I went to then the mayor, and I said, sir, you brought me in to do a very difficult job, but the difficult job turns into an impossible job if I can't bring in a team that I feel has the ability to turn this situation around. And he said to me, well, you know what, if we don't like the rules of the game, then we change the rules. So he introduced legislation to the city council that would allow us to make all of the central office employees at-will employees. That was firestorm number 1 in the city. And probably one of the most interesting days that I had on the job in my 3.5 years here was the day of the city council meeting about this legislation, because it lasted 14 hours. And over the course of the 14 hours, you had lots of people coming in and out and testifying, you know, this lady, she's crazy, what is she trying to do? And the saddest thing about that day was that over the course of that 14 hours, there was little to no talk of children, of schools, or of student achievement. Most, if not all of the talk was about job security and due process and professional development. And I'm thinking to myself, as this was going on, I'm thinking, due process, the children don't have any due process. Right? If you are a kid in this city who does not get the education you deserve in a given year, you can't go to an appeals board somewhere and say, please refund my parents' taxpayer dollars back because I didn't learn what I was supposed to learn this year. No, we just pass you on to the next grade without the skills and knowledge you need to be successful. Everybody keeps their jobs and their contracts and and we move along our merry way, right? So the children don't have due process. At some point in the whole process, someone asked me, they said, don't you believe, Chancellor Rhee, that, for example, an ineffective teacher could be made more effective through professional development? And I said, perhaps, but let us not let children languish in their care in the meantime. Because I can tell you for a fact that I have two daughters, 12 and 9. I sent them to the DC public schools, and I can tell you that if I would have shown up for school on day one, and the principal would have said, welcome to school, here's Olivia's teacher, guess what? She's not so good. But we are going to take this year to professionally develop her and see if she can improve her practice. Olivia and her 23 classmates may not learn how to read this year, but we think that's the right thing to do for this adult. There is no way I would ever accept that for my child. There's no way anyone in this room would ever accept that for your children. But we have a circumstance in this city and in cities across the country where we have scores of children who don't have the adult advocates in their lives, who know how to navigate through the system and let me get my kid out of this classroom and into that program. And so we literally have children languishing. And the reason why this is so harmful is that the research is very clear, especially for poor and minority children, that if you have 3 highly effective teachers in a row versus 3 ineffective teachers in a row, it can literally change your life trajectory. Your probability of graduating from high school, going on to college, et cetera, goes up significantly if you can have those 3 highly effective teachers versus the 3 ineffective ones. So say, for example, I would just say to Olivia, sweetheart, you're going to suck it up this year, right? We're going to take one for the team. What if Olivia and her classmates the following year were unlucky enough to have another ineffective teacher? Are we willing to sacrifice or compromise 2/3 of a child's chance in life because we want to professionally develop to adults? So this is, and I'm not saying, look, I believe in professional development, I believe in investing in the workforce, all of that. But what I'm saying is that we have to ask ourselves those kinds of questions as we are running the system and understand that every decision that we make has a trade-off or a cost associated with it. And when too many of those costs are borne by the children in the system, then we have a completely ineffective system. So this is taking place not just in Washington, D.C., but in school districts across the country, where I think one of the primary problems is that we are making decisions and developing policies every day based on the adults. Let's let all the adults get along. In fact, we are all too willing to turn a blind eye to what is happening to children every day in the classroom in the name of harmony amongst adults. I don't want to make anybody too mad. We got to get along with this person. We have to satisfy that person. That's what's driving our decisions, as opposed to what is the right decision for the children, in such a way that we would say, knowing that it would impact our children tomorrow, right? Do we have our kids in the public? So are these decisions impacting our own children? And will we make the same ones if that was the case? So that's a little bit about what I think is the situation that we're facing right now. Let me tell you very clearly, though, why I have such a belief that we have the ability to change this circumstance, and that I really feel a tremendous amount of confidence in the public education system moving forward. The first is because what we know works, what we know has the greatest impact in school on children and their academic achievement levels is something that is firmly within our control, and that is teachers, the quality of teachers that we put in front of kids every single day. So I, very early on in my tenure here, I had the good fortune of being able to go out, and I would visit schools all of the time. And when I went into a school, I didn't sign in at the office and let somebody take me on the dog and pony show. I would just go in unannounced and walk into any classroom I wanted to, because I really wanted to understand and get a feel for what was going on. So on this particular day, I was in Trinidad, which is one of the most troubled neighborhoods in the city, high murder rate, high crime rate, incredibly high poverty rates, et cetera. Across the street from this school that I went to is a liquor store and a nightclub. Walking into the school, up the path, broken beer bottles, cigarette butts, et cetera. So it was a sort of picture of urban blight. Walked into the school, first classroom that I walk into, it's magical. Walk in, there's a teacher full of energy. She's bounding around. She's doing, I'm sort of picking up, she's doing a unit on Greek mythology. And the kids are reading a chapter book, fourth graders, reading a chapter book. And I'm sort of following along with the discussion, and I'm picking up that this book is about a group of children who got transported back in time, back to the time of Greek gods, and they'd had an adventure, and now they're at the point in the story where they have to travel back in time. So the teacher says to the kids, okay, so please look up at the posters around the wall. Each poster had a different Greek god. And tell me, if you were these kids and you had to travel back in time, which god would you call on for help? So I'm looking at the poster. I got my answer. I'm good. First kid raises his hand, and he said, I would choose Zeus. Because Zeus is the god of gods. He's the boss of everyone else. If he tells you to do something, you have to do it. So I figured just cut out the middleman and go straight to the boss. And I said, brilliant answer, right? Second kid raises her hand. She said, I would choose this god. It was the god of women, children, and families. She said, because these are kids that we're talking about. And a god's responsibility is to take care of their peeps. And that she's responsible for children, so I would choose her. I was like, great, another good answer. Third kid raises his hand. He said, I would choose this god. It was the god of art, music, and literature. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, kid, that was a total misfire. And then he goes on to explain. He said, as you'll remember in the story, the way the kids got transported back in time was because they had dug up an old Greek lyre, and they strummed the lyre, and then they got, traveled back. And so he said, so I figure if they got to go back, it has something to do with the lyre. They should call on the god of music. I'm thinking, these kids gave 6 unbelievably well thought out answers before somebody came up with my lame answer of the god of travel, right? And it was exactly what you want to see in a classroom. 100% of the kids engaged. Higher order thinking skills, analytics, critical thinking. It was amazing. Walk out of that classroom feeling good, walk into the classroom across the hallway. Exact opposite scenario. Teacher is standing at the door, and she's screaming at all the kids, everybody be quiet! I have told you to be quiet. You are not listening to me. I am going to give you 10 seconds. 10, 9, and she starts counting down, and she's flicking the lights, right, on and off. 8, flick, flick, flick. 7, flick, flick. I'm waiting. And you could look at the kids, and they're like, we're waiting too for something to happen. And literally, I was not in either of these classrooms for more than 10 or 15 minutes. Came out thinking, my goodness, in the same school in the toughest part of town, where there's literally rainwater leaking through the roof and ceiling tiles falling on kids' heads, same group of 2 classrooms getting wildly different educational experiences because of the adults who are in front of them each and every day. We have the ability to control who is in front of our children every day. And the research is very clear that this is the in-school factor that matters the most. We can do something about it. It's going to take a lot. It's not going to make everybody happy. But because we have the power and we have the information, this is one of the reasons why I feel very hopeful. The second reason is because of the children themselves. You can now walk into any school in Washington, D.C., talk to any child in the hallway for more than 10 or 15 minutes, and not believe with all of your heart that our children have the ability to do anything we set for them, as long as we as the adults in the system are doing the right thing. So let me give you an example of this. When I took over the school system, there was a middle school that was notorious in the district. The Washington Post labeled it an academic sinkhole. And I went to visit the school, and the first year it was out of control. More kids in the hallway than there were in the classroom. When I went in, kids just running rampant. Swearing at teachers, throwing chairs, disrespect, no instruction going on. It was a madhouse. That year I decided to replace the principal, brought a brand new principal in. he was able to bring in a lot of staff members, some veteran, some new. And during his first year on the job, I started to hear a lot about how things are really turning around at this school. So kind of hearing it, not totally paying attention. And then at the end of the year, we got the test scores back, the academic achievement levels back. And in this school, they had seen a 17 percentage point gain in reading, a 25 percentage point gain in mathematics in 1 year. Unheard of. I mean, really. And so I thought, okay, well, let me go see if this is real. So I go into the school one of the following weeks, and it was amazing what I saw. All of the kids in uniform. Absolute, discipline and structure in every hallway and in every classroom that I went into. Not an earphone in the ear, not a hood on the head. I mean, it was this incredibly well-functioning, happy environment. And so I thought, how does this happen? In this short period of time, it was really quite remarkable. So I came back, I told my staff, and I said, I gotta go talk to the teachers. I gotta find out what's going on, what have they been doing? So I arranged the following week to go and do a teacher listening session at the school. So I roll up at about 3:15, the meeting's at 3:30, and I get out of the car, and these kids, they're getting out of school. So they run up to me, they're like, Chancellor Rhee, Chancellor Rhee, and they're hugging me, and they want to take a picture with me. And let me just tell you, when I usually went into a DC public school, the kids would look at me and be like, who's the Chinese lady running around? These kids knew who I was, and they were so excited to see me, and I thought, okay, this is a little strange, but okay. And I asked, so there was a group of kids around me, and I started asking them questions about the school. One young man in front of me, I said, so what elementary school did you go to? He said, well, I went to this elementary school down the street. And I said, do you think that school prepared you for the rigors of your current school? And he said, well, it was really different. I said, how so? And he said, well, the teachers here, they teach. I said, okay, well, what exactly does that mean? And he said, well, they really teach us to think outside of the box. This is a sixth grader who's saying this to me. I thought, okay. So I, say goodbye to the kids. I walk up into the staff meeting. I used to hold these teacher listening sessions a couple times a week in the district. And so I had a pretty good handle on things. I could walk into one of these things and read the vibe of a staff very quickly. Are they happy? Are they bitter? Do they hate me? What is it? And I could very quickly pick up in this room that there was a lot of anxiety. People were nervous. They were feeling a lot of angst. And I'm thinking to myself, why are you feeling anxious? So, sometimes people are a little scared of me, the dragon lady and Terminator, all this kind of stuff. So I'm thinking to myself, okay, I'm gonna get these people to feel. So I sat them down. I said, I am so pleased with what is happening in this school. The gains last year, 25 and 17%, through the roof. When I came into the classrooms, unbelievable. Let me just tell you now that the gains that you saw last year, first of all, they weren't expected, and number two, I don't expect to see them moving forward. If from here on out you can see 3 or 4 percentage point gains a year, but keep it on a steady pace, you'll be good. So you're okay. And I thought that by saying that, I would kind of relax them. No. They're still looking anxious. I'm like, what's going on? So finally this woman says to me, this one teacher, she said, I think you need to understand that the horse is out of the barn with the children at this school. They saw what happened last year. They saw what they were able to do. And so they've set the goal of seeing a 20 percentage point gain for this year. They're obsessed with it. They check their data every day. Who's green? Who's blue? Who's red? So they're not going to be satisfied with 4%. You might be okay. They're not going to be satisfied with 4%. It's gotten to the point where you cannot hand out a worksheet in a class to these students anymore because they'll revolt. Unless you are prepared with a high-quality, engaging, rigorous lesson, the kids will let you know about it. So what we need from you, lady, is not your assurances about all this stuff. We need your help on what can we do. We need more ideas for unit plans and lesson plans. And they weren't afraid of me. This reform effort in this school was being driven by the children. And they were exactly right. Once the children lived through the high expectations and understanding that they had to have incredibly high-quality, committed teachers who were focused on and saw the growth that was possible, you couldn't rein them back in from there. The children are the ones ultimately who know exactly what's going on, and it's because of them that I have a tremendous amount of faith in this as well. Let me end on this note. I believe that public education is supposed to be the great equalizer in our country. It's supposed to be the thing that ensures that it doesn't matter if you're black or white, rich or poor. We have public schools so that every single child can have an equal shot in life, right? You work hard, you do the right thing, you can live the American dream. That is not the reality for the children in Washington, D.C. today. That is not the reality for many of the children across most of the urban centers in this country today. Because the reality in Washington, D.C. is if you grow up in Georgetown versus if you grow up in Anacostia, you get two wildly different educational experiences. It's the biggest social injustice imaginable, because basically what it means is that we are still, in this day and age, we are still allowing the color of a child's skin and the zip code that they live in to dictate their educational attainment levels and therefore their life chances and their life outcomes. That's so un-American. It goes against every value we have as a country. This, right now, is the time to change this. I believe that we are a moment in time in this country that we've never seen, at least in my 20 years of being in the education reform game, where more attention is being paid to this topic than ever before. Second to jobs, this is the #1 priority that people have right now, is fixing the public education system. We have a moment in time. And I believe that everybody in this room plays a part in this. We have the opportunity right now to live up to our promise to the children of this country of being able to live in a nation where everyone can get an excellent education through a public school if we're willing to make the hard choices necessary. Thank you. Thank you. I have time for a few questions.
Come on, we're not shy. Many of us went to public schools, so. Someone?
There's someone going.
Hi, Michelle. Bill Kitson from the United Way in Toledo, Ohio.
Yes.
We're desperate to get you back to town someday, so I'll see you afterwards about
All
that.
right.
I've heard you speak before, and I continue to struggle, especially in our community, with the role of labor unions. And at some level, labor unions have been amazingly important in our community's history. But at this moment in time, they're getting in our way. How did you handle that? I mean, I'm sure you had some frustrations, and what should the rest of us be thinking about that?
So I think that the debates that are going on today and a lot of the questions that are being asked about labor unions these days, I think are the wrong questions and they're the wrong focus, because people oftentimes come to me and say, you know, how can we get the unions to realize X, Y, and Z? Or how can we get the unions on board with the reforms and this sort of thing? And in my mind, I actually think that's the wrong focus, because what teachers' unions are supposed to do is they are supposed to protect the rights, privileges, priorities, and pay of their members. And they're doing a really good job of that. So we can't begrudge them the fact that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. The problem in my mind is not the fact that there are teachers' unions and labor unions that they're doing. The problem in my mind is that when you have a powerful interest group that is that strong and that influential, and that's the only voice that you hear, right? And it's not balanced out because we don't in this country have a national organized interest group with the same heft as the teachers union that's advocating on behalf of kids. So if you don't have that balance, then you end up with a lopsided equation and a landscape where the policies and the laws and the procedures are driven, you know, again, by that interest group without balance to that. So I think rather than saying, how are we going to, you know, get the labor unions to change, I think we have to say, what are we going to do to provide that balance? Who are we going to bring to the table with millions of dollars and millions of people who are going to be looking out for children? And that's the whole premise behind my new organization, Students First. We're a membership organization. We're trying to get 1 million members and raise $1 billion, during the course of this first year, so that you can say 5, 10 years from now, the most powerful organized interest group in this country is one that works on behalf of children. And so I think that's where our focus needs to be.
Good afternoon, Michelle. Thank you so much for your speech. I'm Ellen Gilligan, and I'm from Milwaukee, the city that your husband or your fiance doesn't really like very much, but we're going to get him back, and he said, I'll like it the next time. I am actually new to the Milwaukee community, but I have entered an environment which is very divided around choice, charter, and public education.
Yeah.
And I've never quite seen the philosophical divide that is going on. And it really is around adults
Yeah.
and who the instrumentalities are and who's
Yeah.
going to get the money.
Yeah.
But the labor unions have obviously been pushed out of the equation a little bit by our new
Yeah.
governor. But I'm wondering if you've ever seen an environment where the public education system is really, to a large extent, I mean, they'd really like to push public education aside and create a totally private
Yeah.
environment. So I'm wondering if you could comment
So
on that.
I'm not a believer in the kind of free market, give every kid a backpack with their money on it and let the market kind of rule. I actually don't think that that's the answer. It's the same, I think we need a very heavily regulated sector. So if you look at the airline industry, we don't let any guy with a prop or a propeller run an airline, right? Because people's lives are at risk. And that's the same way that we should be looking at children. Their lives are at stake depending on the school that they're in and the provider that they have working for them. So I don't believe in the just sort of, let a thousand flowers bloom theory. But I do believe in choice and competition. And I believe that it is absolutely possible to have a healthy and vibrant and strong traditional public education system operating within an entire system that also has a very, very high-performing charter school sector, and then also some kids who are attending private schools through vouchers. And I actually think that tri-sector approach is a good one. I think part of the problem of why we can't get there is because we're too focused on the adult issues. And I was guilty of this. So when I came into Washington, D.C., I'm a Democrat. I'm a card-carrying Democrat. I have been my entire life. And when I got to D.C. and they were telling me about this voucher program, I was like, wait a second. I'm a Democrat. I don't like vouchers, right? And then I actually started to have conversations with mothers in this city who had, by all indications, done everything that we would want them to. So they, live east of the river. They research their neighborhood school. It's a failing school. 10% of the kids on grade level. They say not good enough for my kid. Then they enter into what we called our out-of-boundary lottery process. So we have a subsection of schools on the other part of town that do extraordinarily well. Every year there are a few spots in those schools. People try to apply through the lottery process to get one of those spots. They don't win the lottery. And they come back to me and they say, now what do I do? And if I didn't have a spot at a traditional DC public school where I would feel comfortable sending my own daughters to, then I thought to myself, who am I to stop this mother from taking a $7,500 voucher, which, by the way, was $1,500 less than what we were spending per child, and going to, for example, a Catholic school where they could get a great education? Right. So the arguments that people use around vouchers, but it's, people went nuts when I supported the voucher program because they said, you're a Democrat, you can't go against the party, and you have the most to lose, right? With a voucher program, it's your kids who are going to leave the system, and it's your money that's going to be leaving the system. So we don't understand why you're for this. I said, I'm for it because you and I have different ideas about what the end game is here. I'm not trying to protect and preserve a dysfunctional system that is not serving children well. My goal is to make sure that every child in this city is getting an excellent education. I am quite agnostic as to how that happens. And if there are private schools out there, if there are charter schools out there that can provide kids with an excellent education, more power to you. Let's help them grow. right? So I think it's about the mentality that people have, the defensiveness oftentimes of, oh, it's going to impact our system and our, when you talk to parents, and this is why, we named our organization Students First, because if you talk about policies from the vantage point of what's good for the district or what's good for the system, I agree. The voucher program is not good for the system. If you look at it from the vantage point of what is good for that individual child and that family, then I think you come up with and make different decisions about these policies. So I think that having choice and never putting any family in a situation where they feel like they're trapped in a failing school, that is the most important thing that we need to focus on, is how do we provide that level of choice. Yeah.
I'm Nilda Ruiz from Philadelphia. I'm in awe, and I think that I've seen the movies and heard a lot of what you've said, and I couldn't agree with you more. I wanted to find out, what are your thoughts? I see a lot around the teachers and a lot of assumptions that all the parents actually care, like you do, about their children. In the inner city, sometimes you have a little bit of apathy and not the care that should be there. So I wanted to find out your thoughts around that, and also, what do we do with kids and the distractions? I just feel there's so much distractions today with the phones, with the video games, the PSP, and these are like areas that I haven't seen at least addressed anywhere that I've looked at. And what are your thoughts around that?
Yeah. So let me answer the parent question first, because this comes up a lot. And in fact, in a lot of education debates, you'll hear people oftentimes say, basically, if the kids had better parents, then we wouldn't have the problems that we have. And there is absolutely no doubt that when you have higher parental engagement and participation and involvement, you get better outcomes for kids. So a system and a city needs to be doing everything possible to figure out, how do we engage more of our parents? How do we really get them to understand what's going on in the schools and bring them in and welcome them and respect them, et cetera? There's no doubt that we have to do that. However, on the flip side of that, I'll say this. I ran into a friend of mine who lives in the city a few weeks ago. He told me this story. He's originally from North Carolina. All of his family lives in North Carolina. And he said that he heard from his family that his grandniece was having problems in school. So he calls down to the school and says, I'm this child's granduncle, can I help you, what's going on? And they said, well, she got into a lot of trouble at school, and we are not going to allow her to come back into school until her mother comes. And my friend said, let me tell you something. You don't want my niece to come into the school, okay? Because she's gonna start a fight with somebody, and then you have to call the cops. Trust me, you don't want my niece in the school. Are you gonna abdicate your responsibility for educating my grandniece because of what her mom, is gonna do or not do? He said, because if that's the case, then you might as well tell this 9-year-old to drop out of school now, because her mother is just not gonna do the right thing. And I think the question we have to ask ourselves is, are we willing to subjugate children to a lower quality education and lower expectations overall because of something that they cannot control, which is who their parents are and what they choose to do or not do? And I think the answer to that has to be that we have to understand the challenges, we have to address them head on, we have to be very aggressive about them, but at the end of the day, what the parental involvement situation looks like, it can't be an excuse for why we can't see the highest level of outcomes for kids. So that's the first. The second, in terms of the distractions, I see this. I was with a friend of mine the other day who had an 18-year-old, and the kid was doing this with the iPad. It was crazy with the iPad. They know. And I think one of the things that we are trying so hard to figure out, how do we get the kids away from the distractions, that we haven't thought critically about how do we actually, bring these things into the classroom. We are living in a completely different day and age now, where kids have so much access to technology and individualized little farms, and my kid's always like, I got a farm, I gotta go, whatever, tend the farm and all this stuff. What are you talking about? They have their own little worlds that they're dealing with, and I do believe that if we're smart and innovative, we can figure out a way to incorporate that kind of technology into the classroom instead of saying, how are we going to keep kids away from that? We're not going to be able to keep kids away from that. That is the reality that they live in now. So we have to come into this century, realize where kids are, what their day-to-day looks like, and then figure out how to effectively incorporate that into their instruction.
Hello, Michelle. My name is Robert. I'm from Cincinnati. And my question revolves around testing. I had an experience 2 years ago. I took a teaching job after finishing a corporate career. And I went into the school and I was excited and test drive everything, it appears. So after the first quarter, we had an assessment and we got the reports. We knew all of the weaknesses of the children. And I asked the question, okay, now how do we address them? There was absolutely no time because in every week, every lesson plan, every day, there's indicators that have to be met so that it can be evaluated, and it drives the complete system, you know, as a result of No Child Left Behind. So I saw no opportunity for teachers to do any kind of a remediation because it was always the next test, the next benchmark, and then at the end of the year, all of the resources, everything flowed from how those things were done. Mm-hmm. And it even pushed out any kind of rounding or enrichment. It was all about that. Test, 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 results, scores. So I don't mean to be going on about it, but
Yeah.
can you
Yeah, sure.
share?
So I think there's kind of two different issues within that question. One is a lot of people are saying, you know, there's an overemphasis on the test, we're teaching to the test, there's that kind of concern. And I actually don't sit in that camp. I think that we have to measure the progress of our students. For far too long in our public school system, we were just doing things and we weren't actually holding ourselves accountable to whether or not kids were learning. There has to be an objective, consistent, quantitative way of determining whether or not children are learning. And I do think that it has to be standardized across the board. So I don't think that tests in and of themselves are a bad thing. I think where they start to go bad is when the whole focus is on the test. And I think that what people need to realize, and we had to do this, a little bit of this in DC, is to get people to realize, look at the research that's out there. The research shows that children who have access to a broad-based curriculum that includes art and music and PEs actually do better academically. So kids who have that broad-based curriculum do better academically. Further, the Gates Foundation just came out with a study that showed that teachers who are teaching to the test, their children actually don't do better on the test. So we need to get people to understand that just by, in the last 8 weeks, let's just do reading and math and stop doing everything else. That kind of stuff actually doesn't get you to the result that you want. So I think that's part of it, making sure that the pendulum doesn't swing too far on one side or the other. The issue that you talked about is a very important one. So you had me up until, so we took these assessments, and then we knew based on the assessment exactly where the kid was weak and strong. We, as parents, as administrators, we all want that. The part that's missing oftentimes is, how do we then take that data and modify our instruction to ensure that something different is happening in the classroom that then will result in a different outcome for the next benchmark assessment? And that piece is the missing piece, right? So there are far too many professional development, focus areas, programs, et cetera, that are helping teachers understand not just here is your data, that's step number one, that's an important step, but then how do you utilize the data to improve your instruction every day? And that is a critical piece that has to be put in place, absolutely. Okay, thank you.
Well, I'm very relaxed, and I must say, I want to say thank you to you all, because you were all way too kind to me. I would like to take a little liberty of being the Northeast Vice President to do one more thing. I'd like all of you to pick up your glasses. You heard from Senator Rhee last night. Today is most likely the last time that we're all together, and I'd like us to toast our departing Rhode Island Program Director, who's moving on to make the federal government better. So, to the extended family, Barbara, only the best, and you could always come home. And speaking about home, Pack your bags, have a safe trip, and let's keep in touch. Thank you very much.